Hey guys. Tonight we're stepping into the faraway highlands of Ethiopia centuries ago, where legend says a quiet discovery is about to change the world. Picture a misty mountain slope at dawn. The air is cool and thin. Below rough cliffs and acacia trees, a young goat herd leads his flock through dew-laden grass. You walk beside him in the early light. Goat bells clink softly in the valley. The world still feels half asleep. The herder's eyelids droop as he trails after the animals until he notices something strange. Up ahead, several goats are nibbling on the bright red berries of a wild bush. Moments later, those goats begin to prance and frolic with uncanny energy. They butt heads and scamper up rocks instead of settling down. The herder's tired eyes widen in disbelief. You can sense his curiosity stirring awake. He edges closer and plucks a handful of the red cherries from the bush. The smooth skin of the fruit yields a faint, grassy smell. Unsure, he brings a berry to his mouth and bites down. It's bitter, unexpected, enough to make him spit it out, but within minutes, a gentle warmth spreads through his limbs. The lingering night fog in his mind lifts. He feels alert, alive. The goats bounce around him, their little hooves drumming on stone. He can't help but laugh under his breath. Something in these humble forest fruits has given both man and beast a new sprightliness. By dusk, the herder has gathered a pouch full of the mysterious berries. Together, you follow him down a winding path toward a tiny monastery nestled in the hills. Lamplight glows in a single window. Inside, a lone monk struggles to stay awake through long evening prayers, his head nodding from exhaustion. The goat herd, eager to share his find, pours the berries out on a wooden table. He explains what he saw, the dancing goats, the burst of vigor he felt. The monk's eyebrows rise in skepticism. To him, these are just wild fruit, possibly a temptation. With a disapproving frown, he sweeps the berries off the table and into the glowing hearth. For a moment, disappointment fills the room until a rich, unexpected aroma curls up from the fire. The skins crackle and darken in the heat, releasing a smell like no other, smoky, nutty, a hint of sweetness. The monk pauses, breathing deeply. One by one, other drowsy monks creep closer, drawn by the fragrant plume. Curious now, the abbot rakes the browned beans from the embers and crushes them. A new idea sparkles in his mind. He boils water and cautiously stirs the grounds in. Soon, the kitchen is filled with the comforting scent of roasting and brewing, earthy and warm, like a promise in the pre-dawn dark. You watch as the monks line up with clay cups. The abbot ladles out the hot, brown liquid, and each man sips in turn. Their eyes light up at the bitter taste. It's strong. Strange, but within moments the monks feel a gentle quickening in their veins. Where there was weariness, now there is clarity. The abbot's hands stop trembling with fatigue. The youngest monks straighten their backs, alert. Evening prayer stretches on into midnight, and not one dozes off. They share grateful glances. They've found a God-given answer to the long hours of devotion. According to this story, the world's first cup of coffee has been brewed for the most relatable reason possible: to chase away sleep and light up the mind. As the night deepens, the Ethiopian wind carries the scent of roasted coffee berries out of the monastery and across the hills. In the goat pens, the animals settle calmly now, their earlier frenzy spent. The young herder sits by the embers, cradling a warm cup in his calloused hands, feeling both astonished and proud. Outside, stars prick the sky above the plateau, and for once, no one is yawning. A quiet wonder has taken hold. News of the energizing red berries will spread from this mountainside, past monk to monk, village to village. Soon it will travel beyond the lush forests of Kaffa, journeying eastward. In this ancient highland, coffee's story is beginning, in energy, in curiosity, in the simple human hope for a little more wakefulness. Even in these early days, coffee was more than a drink. The Oromo people of Ethiopia, for example, learned to mix crushed coffee beans with butter and spices, creating a food called buna kela. They would roll the roasted beans in clarified butter and salt, forming hearty little balls to carry on long journeys. In a land where meals were sparse, this coffee meal could fill the belly and fortify the traveller. A bitter handful of beans became sustenance, a poor man's ration that gave strength when nothing else could. Coffee, from the very start, was a tool for survival as much as a treat. Sufi's secret, Yemen, 15th century. Our story drifts across the Red Sea now, landing in the port of Mocha in Yemen. It is the late 15th century, and the air here is heavy with the smell of spices, salt, and possibility. Lanterns bob on gentle waves as ships unload sacks of exotic goods under a sliver of moon. Among the treasures coming ashore are bundles of dried coffee cherries from Africa, humble little parcels carrying the secret of wakefulness. In the hills beyond the port, you follow a narrow trail up to a stone Sufi monastery. The walls are thick and sun-baked. Inside, the night is alive with low voices and the glow of oil lamps. The Sufis, Islamic mystics devoted to prayer and song, gather in a circle on the floor. Tonight, they will pray and chant Allah's names until the morning star. And, to aid their devotions, they prepare kahwa, the drink of coffee, for perhaps the first time in history. In the corner of the dim room, a robed figure tends a small brazier of charcoal. He opens a leather pouch and draws out hard, brown beans, roasted coffee seeds, cleaned of their fruit. Carefully, he drops a handful into an iron mortar. Clack, clack, the rhythmic sound of a pestle grinding beans echoes off the stone walls. A rich aroma unfurls, filling the space with notes of spice and earth. The other dervishes breathe it in, recognizing it as the scent of welcome midnight company. You feel it too, a dark, comforting fragrance that cuts through the heaviness of the hour. Outside, a desert wind rustles through date palms. Inside, the sound of grinding and whispered prayers intertwine. Once the beans are pulverized, the Sufi elder adds the powder to a tall clay pot of water and sets it on the glowing coals. The brew simmers slowly, bubbles rising as the water blackens. Someone adds a pinch of cardamom for aroma. The men wait patiently, fingers absently rolling prayer beads as the coffee grounds steep. Soon, the elder uses a cloth to lift the hot vessel and begin pouring out the steaming coffee into small glazed cups. He passes them hand to hand around the circle. You accept one, its porcelain warm between your palms, the liquid nearly black and faintly steaming. The scent is intoxicating, smoky, bitter with a hint of sweetness from the spice. They raise the cups to their lips in unison. The first sip is strong and bitter, startling at first taste. A few men cough softly, unused to the intensity, but as the warmth spreads in their chests, smiles bloom in their tired eyes. Within minutes, slouched backs straighten, heavy eyelids lift. Where there was drowsiness, a subtle alertness now takes hold. The Sheikh, Ali ibn Omar Ashadali, a patron saint of this brew, as later generations will recall, begins the dhikr, the ritual chant. His voice is deep and melodious, repeating praises of God. The circle of Sufis responds in harmony, voices rising and falling in a soothing cadence. Cup in hand, you feel the energy in the room intensify. These men have been granted a wine of Arabia, but one that doesn't cloud the mind. Instead, it sharpens it. Their faith prohibits wine from grapes, yet this dark drink is something different, a lawful elixir that lifts the spirit without inebriation. All through the Yemeni night, the chants continue. The Sufis sway gently, lost in devotion, and the coffee keeps their thoughts clear and present. Midnight passes, then hours more, and not one soul drifts into sleep. The stars wheel above the desert as prayers unfurl like silk. The coffee's caffeine courses through veins, a steady drumbeat of clarity. One young disciple closes his eyes in silent prayer, feeling for the first time that he can truly resist his body's urge to rest. You notice his fingers tremble slightly from the stimulant, not in fear, but in eagerness. By the time the first faint light of dawn glows on the horizon, the circle of mystics is still wide awake, voices hoarse but joyous. In the cool pre-dawn, they finish the last drops of the brew, now cold and thick at the bottom of their cups. A tired, contented laughter ripples around the room. They have endured the night in worship, aided by this miracle drink. Word spreads quietly, at first among learned circles. In Yemen, there is a potion that chases off sleep. Scholars and students in the city of Aden begin boiling the beans to help them study long hours. Traders passing through the bustling port of Mocha carry stories of the energizing beverage to distant lands. They call it chahwa, Arabic for wine, hinting at its deep color and powerful effect. But this wine does not violate any holy law. In fact, imams and sheikhs find it helps them recite extra prayers during Ramadan nights. Some say the Prophet Muhammad himself blessed this drink in dreams and legends, sending it as a gift to aid the faithful when wine was forbidden. In time, every Sufi lodge and mosque school in Yemen has a cauldron of coffee heating over the fire, especially as sunset falls on days of fasting. A new ritual is taking shape. The coffee ceremony, as sacred in its preparation as in its purpose. Step outside the monastery with me now. The call to dawn prayer, Fajr, echoes from a distant minaret. The sky is turning pale blue over Mocha's rooftops. Fishermen are already pushing their boats out to sea. Along the cobbled streets, sleepy shopkeepers open their stalls. And here on a corner, a young Yemeni vendor sets up a stand with a copper ibrick pot simmering on coals, selling cups of this strange brew to travellers and locals alike. You inhale, the whole neighbourhood smells of roasting beans and spice. A pair of tired night watchmen from the city guard approach. Their eyes are bloodshot from being up all night patrolling the gates. The vendor fills small bowls with hot coffee and hands them over. Gratefully, the guards sip, feeling life flow back into their weary bodies. Their post-shift walk home suddenly a little easier. Coffee is quietly weaving itself into everyday life, a helper in the shadows, a secret weapon against fatigue. Soon, from this southern tip of Arabia, the habit will spread on the sails of ships and the tongues of pilgrims carrying kahwa north into the wider world. The scene shifts to the holy city of Mecca in the year 1511. It's a warm evening after prayers. The narrow streets near the Grand Mosque are alive with whispers and footfalls. Under the yellow glow of lanterns, men gather in a tucked-away courtyard, sitting on woven mats. In their centre hisses a brass coffee pot on a bed of hot coals. They pass around small ceramic cups, careful not to clink too loudly. These devout Muslims, scholars, merchants, perhaps a weary pilgrim or two, are indulging in the new drink that arrived via the Red Sea trade. They sip the strong, black coffee and converse in low tones about scripture and local news. The aroma of coffee mingles with night-blooming jasmine and the distant incense from the mosque. A few of the men close their eyes in appreciation as each sip chases away the heaviness of the long day's fast. Here, in the cradle of Islam, coffee has found eager followers who love its ability to keep them wakeful through midnight devotions and discussions. But not everyone in Mecca approves. Behind a carved wooden screen, a stern-faced official named Khair Beg watches the gathering with disapproval. He is the city's governor, and to his eyes this looks like a band of troublemakers. What are these men plotting over their cups? Why do their eyes shine so with a fervour that could upend order? Rumours have reached the governor that coffee is an intoxicant, a drug not unlike wine, and that these late-night coffee circles breed radical ideas. He remembers hearing clerics condemn this bitter drink of Satan, saying it should be forbidden to the faithful. Khair Beg's jaw sets in resolve. He motions to his armed guards. The quiet murmur of the coffee gathering is suddenly broken by the clatter of soldiers' boots. Before the men can hide their cups, the courtyard is raided. You step back into the shadows as chaos erupts. Guards kick over the coffee brazier, sending glowing coals skittering across the stones. Hot coffee splashes onto the ground. One man protests that they have broken no law. This drink is not wine, it's a gift that helps us pray, but the soldiers seize the clay cups and smash them. Khair Beg himself snatches the coffee pot, its handle still hot, and holds it up like evidence of a crime. The gathered worshippers are forced to disperse into the alleys as the governor declares an official ban on coffee in Mecca. By his decree, selling or drinking coffee is now punishable. The year is 1511, and coffee has made its first powerful enemy. The next morning, word of the ban spreads throughout the city's markets. Stall owners hastily hide their stock of green coffee beans behind sacks of rice. In the spice bazaar, a worried merchant scoops loose coffee grounds into a jar and buries it under less suspicious wares. Coffee, once openly traded here, has become contraband overnight. You wander the streets and sense the tension. An imam preaches at the mosque that coffee is an innovation that leads men astray, that its stimulating effect is akin to intoxication and therefore haram forbidden. Some pious folk nod in agreement, having always been suspicious of the strange beverage. But others exchange glances of disappointment. They will miss their lively evening talks and the joyful alertness coffee gave them. For a few weeks, Mecca's coffee drinkers go into hiding. At dusk, behind shuttered doors, small groups still meet in secret. Imagine one such scene, a humble home on a back street, its windows darkened. Inside, a family of coffee sellers quietly rekindle a fire in their hearth. A teenage boy grinds beans in a mortar with a muffled rhythm so as not to draw attention. His mother heats water and brews the coffee as quickly as she can. A knock comes at the door. Their trusted neighbours slip in, faces anxious. In hushed voices they exchange coins for warm cups, cradling them gratefully. The family risks punishment to provide this comfort. The father keeps one ear alert for any sign of the city watch. Every creak of a floorboard or distant shout makes them jump. They all know the governor's men are patrolling, looking to catch violators. Yet, as the illicit coffee touches their tongues, a familiar, calm focus settles on them. In that moment, it seems worth the danger. These secret gatherings keep the spirit of coffee alive in Mecca even under the ban. The crackdown does not last long. The outlawing of coffee falters within weeks when higher authorities in Cairo and the Arabian courts hear of it. News travels that Khair Beg may have overstepped. Indeed, the Sultan of Cairo, upon learning of the ban, reportedly chuckles and orders it lifted. Let the people have their coffee, but ensure they gather peacefully. By the Sultan's command, the ban in Mecca is overturned, and coffee is permitted once more by 1524. the governor's religious pretexts cannot hold up against the sheer popularity and profitable trade of the bean. Merchants cheer as coffee vendors roll their carts back into the open. The first public coffee house of Mecca reopens its doors, the sound of backgammon dice and friendly debate spilling out once more into the night air. From Mecca, coffee had already journeyed further north to Cairo and Damascus, even before the ban. In Cairo of the early 16th century, imagine walking into a Café Khaneh, one of the city's new coffee houses near the great University of Al-Azhar. The year might be 1520. The shop is modest, lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Dozens of patrons sit on low benches, cups of coffee in hand. The room hums with lively conversation. Students from the university argue theology at one table. Next to them, a pair of poets swap rhymes and jokes. In the corner, a musician plucks softly at an oud, giving the space a gentle soundtrack. Every so often, the proprietor, a burly man with a flour-dusted apron, shouts an order to a boy tending the brazier. More coffee, 2 cups, extra cardamom. The boy dutifully fills long-handled brass tsezve pots with water and fresh grounds, nestling them into the hot embers. With each pour, the rich smell of brewing coffee thickens in the air, keeping everyone alert and engaged. This coffee house has become a true school of the wise, where ideas and news flow as freely as the coffee itself. Yet Cairo, too, sees a backlash. In 1532, conservative authorities convince the city's rulers that these coffee gatherings are breeding grounds for vice and sedition. One fateful day, soldiers fan out across Cairo's coffee houses with orders to shut them all down. They barge into the very cafe we imagined, overturning tables and dousing the hearth. Patrons scatter in alarm. The troops confiscate sacks of beans and raze the cosy shops that had become second homes to so many. The warehouses of coffee are seized and sacked, their contents thrown into the Nile or burned. For a time, an uneasy quiet falls over Cairo's nights. In the absence of their beloved cafes, people retreat to private gatherings or else sulk at home, missing the animated evenings of music and brew. But once again, coffee's allure is too strong and its economic value too great for suppression to last. Within a few years, the bans in Cairo also crumble. By the mid-1500s, both the religious and secular leadership in the Islamic world largely relent. Coffee is here to stay, and it can be enjoyed in good conscience so long as decorum is kept. Learned opinions shift. Many clerics rule that coffee is not like wine after all, and even extol its ability to sharpen the mind for worship rather than distract from it. In fact, a renowned Mufti Islamic jurist in Istanbul declares coffee permissible and praises its benefits. The Ottoman Sultan himself grows fond of the beverage. By the late 1500s, the Sultan's court employs an official coffee maker to prepare the royal cups. From these turbulent early years, coffee emerges triumphant across the Arabian Peninsula and North Africa. The attempts to ban it, to deem it sinful or seditious, have only fanned curiosity and demand. Now every caravanserai from Jeddah to Jerusalem offers hot coffee to travellers. Pilgrims returning from Mecca carry sacks of beans back to their homelands as prized souvenirs. They affectionately dub it the wine of Araby, remembering how it kept them singing praises through the night. Even some of the skeptics come around after they themselves taste the brew and find their tongues loosened in friendship and minds cleared of fatigue. Coffee has woven itself into the fabric of Islamic cities, from quiet dawn rituals to boisterous midnight debates. And it will continue to spread, following the trade routes into the heart of the Ottoman Empire, where it will spark a new social revolution in the decades to come. Follow the aroma of roasting beans and the trail of animated chatter, and you find yourself in Istanbul, the glittering capital of the Ottoman Empire. Around the year 1650, the city straddles two continents and hums with life day and night. Minarets and market stalls pierce the skyline. Along the cobbled streets by the Golden Horn, an unmistakable fragrance drifts from open doorways. The thick, bittersweet smell of coffee beckoning all who pass. Coffee has by now become the lifeblood of this imperial city. In fact, Istanbul's first coffeehouse opened almost a century earlier, in 1554, and since then hundreds more have sprung up in every district. They are known as kahvehanen, and they form the heart of urban social life. Step into one of these coffee houses with me. It's nestled in a busy bazaar just off a lane of spice merchants. Inside, the air is hazy with tobacco smoke from long hookahs and braziers burning fragrant wood. Low wooden tables dot the room, surrounded by plush floor cushions and backless stools. The walls are decorated with colourful carpets and hanging brass lamps. Despite the late hour, the place is full. Imagine merchants in flowing robes reclining on cushions, their slippers kicked off, discussing the day's bargains over steaming cups. In one corner sits a group of scholars in turbans and robes, fiercely debating poetry and philosophy. Nearby, a pair of Janissary officers, elite soldiers, laugh over a game of chess, their polished helmets set aside. There's a subtle mix of classes here, rarely seen elsewhere. The coffeehouse is a great social equalizer where a humble shopkeeper might trade jokes with a wealthy silk trader, or an imam share wisdom with a fishmonger. At the centre of it all, an Izzat charcoal stove holds multiple sezvis, the small long-handled pots used to brew Turkish coffee. A coffee master, called a kahveci, stands attentively over them. He is a craftsman, brewing each cup to order with great care. Watch as he spoons finely ground coffee, powdery as dust, into a copper kezve, adds water and a spoon of sugar for those who want it sweet, then nestles it into the coals. The liquid foams up quickly, threatening to boil over. Deftly, he pulls it away for a moment, then returns it to the heat repeatedly, creating a rich froth. This slow brewing method takes patience, almost a dance with the fire. The result is a tiny cup of coffee, as black as night, and strong enough to jolt the Sultan's horse. One by one, he serves the cups on carved saucers, not a drop spilled. The patrons hold their coffee delicately, sipping in small increments. It's far too hot and thick to gulp. They savour it, letting the unfiltered grounds settle at the bottom. A satisfied sigh escapes a bearded old man as he brings the warm cup to his lips, the heat taking the December chill out of his bones. The coffee house is alive with storytelling. On a raised platform, a travelling poet with a lyre enthralls a small crowd with a tale of heroes and love, while gesturing dramatically and occasionally sipping his coffee for dramatic pause. Laughter erupts from another side, where a shadow puppet show, Karagöz and Hatzivat, plays out, casting flickering silhouettes against a lantern-lit sheet. The audience chuckles and sips, their eyes bright. Over near the windows, you catch strains of music. A trio of musicians with a flute and drum have started a soft tune. Two young men seated by them tap their feet, energized by the melody and caffeine alike. The whole coffeehouse feels like a theatre of life, fueled by the communal joy of coffee. Indeed, these places are nicknamed schools of the wise because one can learn as much here in an evening as in any madrasa school. Yet in the warm glow of this scene, shadows of politics and suspicion sometimes flicker. The authorities in Istanbul are well aware that these same convivial coffee houses can harbour dangerous talk. Imagine, in a dim corner, a few disgruntled writers and ex-officials huddle close, voices barely above a whisper. Perhaps they exchange satirical quips about a vizier's new tax policy, or question the competence of a distant governor. In the safety of the bustling kahvein, such dissenting opinions find fertile ground. Eyes dart to ensure no eavesdropping spy is near. Historically, the Ottoman sultans grew wary of coffee houses precisely for this reason. They became breeding grounds for political discussion and public opinion, something rulers seldom welcome. Sultan Murad IV, in particular, feared that plotting janissaries and unruly subjects could hatch rebellions amid the chatter of cafes. It's said that in the 1630s, he even enforced a temporary ban on public coffee drinking in Istanbul, punishing violators severely: first offence with a beating, second offence by tossing the unlucky coffee lover into the Bosphorus Strait. Patrons learned to be cautious, sipping under the watchful eyes of the Sultan's guards who prowled the streets, listening for seditious conversations. Tonight, however, the mood is peaceful. The ban has long been lifted. Even Murad IV himself secretly enjoyed coffee in his palace by rumour. Here in the coffee house, trust and camaraderie bind the patrons. A waiter circulates with a tray of locum Turkish delight, sugary jelly candies, offering a sweet counterpoint to the coffee's bitterness. A few women are present too, veiled and discreet, in a side room reserved for them. While many coffee houses were male domains, some, in the Ottoman Empire, did allow women, or women had their own coffee gatherings at home. In fact, coffee has become so ingrained in Ottoman culture that it touches family life and law. An old saying goes that a Turkish bride was judged by how well she could brew coffee, and an Ottoman law famously allowed a woman to divorce her husband if he failed to provide her with coffee. That's how vital it was to the home. One can imagine a weary wife in a quiet Istanbul courtyard at dawn, grinding beans with a hand mill. The rasping sound wakes her husband, who smiles at the familiar morning fragrance. Woe to the household where such aroma does not greet the day. Back in our coffee house, hours slip by. News from afar is exchanged. A merchant fresh from Persia shares rumours of a new Shah. A sailor just returned from Venice marvels at how Europeans, too, have taken up the coffee habit. When he describes a Venetian noble sipping coffee with a piece of sugar, the locals laugh in disbelief at such an indulgence. The hanging lamps burn low, and a few patrons doze off in their seats despite the coffee. Even its magic has limits. Finally, as the call for the night prayer Aisha echoes faintly from a mosque, people begin to drain their cups. The kahveci serves one last round. A thick, almost syrupy brew known as killer coffee for the road. It will keep some eyes open till sunrise. You step out into the cool night with the departing crowd. Istanbul's narrow alleys are quiet, save for distant dog barks and the lap of the Bosphorus against the docks. Overhead, a crescent moon hangs, the same shape as the little coffee cups. You realize that in this empire, coffee isn't merely a drink, it's become a way of life, entwined with hospitality, intellectual life, and daily routine. From the Sultan in his gilded hall, who expects his morning cup brought on a silver tray, to the poorest porter who savours a shared coffee over glowing coals in the market, everyone takes part in this ritual. Coffee has unified rich and poor in a shared comfort and given the empire a new pulse, lively, alert, and connected. Soon, this Ottoman passion will captivate foreign visitors and envoys who will carry it back to their own lands. The journey now carries us across the Mediterranean into Europe. It's the mid-17th century, and in cities from London to Vienna, a curious new fashion is taking hold, the drinking of coffee. Imagine arriving in Venice in the year 1615. The lagoon city's canals reflect the golden afternoon light. At the bustling Rialto market, among sacks of pepper and silk, you spot a small crowd gathered around a merchant's stall. On the counter steams a pot of inky black liquid. The merchant, a Venetian trader just returned from Istanbul, ladles out tiny servings to skeptical onlookers. They sniff the strange brew and whisper among themselves. Some make the sign of the cross, for local priests have muttered that this dark, bitter drink might be the invention of Satan. Nevertheless, a few braver souls take a sip. One elderly nobleman, used to his morning chocolate or wine, shudders at the bitterness, but then his eyes widen. Interesting. I feel awake, he exclaims. And so, in fits and starts, coffee finds its first European admirers. At first, coffee in Europe is confined to the wealthy and scholarly, an exotic Eastern novelty to sample in salons. But its reputation spreads quickly. By 1645, Venice has its first official coffee house, and the idea percolates outward. Travellers and traders carry beans, and knowledge to Marseille, Paris, Vienna. In the coffee houses of Europe, the beverage soon sheds its suspicion and gains acclaim. One famous tale recounts how some clergymen in Rome tried to have coffee banned as a satanic influence until Pope Clement VIII insisted on tasting it himself. The Pope supposedly declared, with a smile, "This Satan's drink is so delicious that it would be a pity to let only infidels have it," and jokingly baptized coffee to make it officially Christian. Whether or not the story is true, it reflects reality. By the 17th century's end, the Church gave coffee its blessing, and devout Christians embraced the cup that helped them stay alert in prayer as much as any monk. Now picture London in the year 1700. The city streets bustle under flickering oil lamps. You step into a narrow alley off Exchange Street and come upon Jonathan's Coffee House, one of the city's many new coffee establishments. The sign above the door shows a Turk in a turban serving tiny cups, a nod to coffee's Ottoman origins. Inside, the coffee house is crowded and noisy, but in a different way from the Ottoman cafe. Here the patrons mostly stand or perch on high stools, and many keep their coats on against the English chill. The air smells of coffee, yes, but also of candle wax, pipe smoke, and wet wool. A young man in a wig ladles coffee from a huge cauldron set into a brazier. London's coffee is usually brewed strong and black, often with a dash of cold water to settle the grounds. Sugar brought from the West Indies is available for those who can pay extra for a spoonful. The customers shout their orders with a mix of accents: traders from the docks, scholars from the Inns of Court, sea captains, and even a few aristocrats drawn by the vibrant atmosphere. What they all share is a craving for the sharp clarity the beverage provides. Gone for now is the daytime ale or wine. These men want their wits about them. In fact, it's noted that coffee's rise contributed to a decline in morning beer drinking in places like England, making for a more sober and focused populace at work. One observer in 1660 marvels that unlike alehouses, where patrons stumble out red-nosed and blurry, the coffee house produces persons fit for business by morning's light. Listen to the din. In one corner, a ship insurer discusses marine policies with a ship owner. In fact, Lloyd's Coffee House, just a stone's throw away, is where maritime insurance deals are born, destined to become the famous Lloyd's of London. At another table, a cluster of scientists from the Royal Society excitedly discuss a new discovery, sketching diagrams on paper stained with coffee rings. Coffee houses in England have earned the nickname penny universities. For the price of a penny cup, anyone can join in learned conversation or hear the latest news and gossip. Indeed, many ordinary Londoners come not just to drink coffee, but to read bulletins and gazettes posted on the walls. This is an age before mass newspapers, and the coffee house doubles as the newsroom. One might find a notice about a public lecture, the latest ship arrivals, or scandalous political pamphlets being passed from hand to hand, much to the government's annoyance. Not all are fans of this new social scene. Over your shoulder, pinned by the entryway, you notice a pamphlet titled "The Women's Petition Against Coffee," dated 1674. In it, anonymous English wives comically lament that their husbands spend too much time at the coffee house and that the excessive use of that newfangled, abominable, heathenish liquor called coffee has made the men impotent and as unfruitful as the deserts. You suppress a chuckle. Clearly, not everyone welcomes the coffee craze. King Charles II himself grew alarmed that these buzzing hives of chatter might harbour sedition. In 1675, he attempted to ban coffee houses as hotbeds of rebellious talk. But such was the public outcry, merchants, intellectuals, even nobles protested that the ban was rescinded after just 11 days. Coffee had become too integral to daily life and commerce. Shutting the coffee houses threatened to quiet the very pulse of information in London. So the coffee houses endured and multiplied. By this turn of the century, over 3,000 coffee houses thrive in England. Each tends to have its specialty clientele. There are coffee houses for writers, for sea captains, for clergy, for political partisans. In Oxford, one of the earliest opened in 1650, serves students and professors discussing philosophy. In Paris, the first coffee house opened in the 1660s, and by the 1720s, the city's famous Café de Procope welcomes luminaries like Voltaire and Rousseau to sip coffee and strategize revolution. It's said Voltaire drank dozens of cups a day, often mixed with chocolate, fueling his sharp wit. In Vienna, legend tells of how the Viennese, after repelling the Ottoman siege in 1683, found bags of coffee left behind by the Turks and soon developed their own coffee culture, adding milk and sugar to suit European palates, allegedly inventing the cappuccino named after Capuchin monks' brown hoods and the café latte. Whether born from war spoils or trade, Vienna's elegant coffee salons became centres of music and gentility. By the mid-18th century, coffee is fully at home in Europe. Household kitchenwares now include shiny silver or porcelain coffee pots for brewing at home. In drawing rooms, genteel couples sip demi-tasse cups of coffee during visits, sometimes controversial for the way it brings men and women together in mixed company to talk. But in enlightened society, this is embraced. People note how coffee's stimulating effect contrasts with the dulling of alcohol. Instead of slurring words, coffee drinkers grow more eloquent, or so they believe. One German composer, J.S. Bach, even writes a playful coffee cantata in the 1730s, in which a young woman passionately sings of her love for coffee, declaring it more delightful than 1,000 kisses and begging for another cup. Audiences chuckle, recognizing their own mild coffee addiction reflected in the music. Notably, coffee also penetrates the American colonies during this era. In the 18th century, tea is still the favoured drink in places like Boston and New York until history intervenes. When King George III's exorbitant tea tax leads to the Boston Tea Party in 1773, defiant American colonists boycott tea in favour of coffee. In the wake of that protest, coffee, the patriotic drink, catches on widely in the New World. By the time of the Revolutionary War, adopting coffee over tea becomes a subtle symbol of American identity. One patriot writes in 1777, "I must toast liberty with coffee, not tea." Thus, coffee's reach extends across the Atlantic, intertwining with the spirit of independence. As evening falls on our imaginary tour of Europe, let's briefly slip into one more scene. Paris, circa 1789. The city simmers with unrest and idealism. We enter the Café de Foire, near the Palais Royal. The air inside crackles with excitement and smoke. In a corner, a young journalist stands on a chair, coffee cup in one hand, gesturing passionately with the other. He is reading aloud a fiery call to action against tyranny. Around him, a crowd of citizens, some in wigs and silks, others in labourers' caps, cheer and pound their cups on tables in agreement. The very French Revolution itself is being fermented in these caffeinated gatherings. Across the street, at Café Prokop, leaders of the budding revolution plot and plan over coffee late into the night. In their fervour, one might say the coffee's heat matches the heat of their ideals. The next morning, July 14th, revolutionaries stormed the Bastille, and one can imagine some had fortified themselves with strong coffee beforehand. History has been percolating in the coffee houses of Europe, changing the world one cup at a time. By the dawn of the 19th century, coffee is firmly woven into the daily rhythm of European life, from the grandest salon to the humblest kitchen. The stage is set for coffee's next great journey, beyond the coffee cups of consumers to the vast plantations and colonies where it is grown. The insatiable demand in Europe means that whoever can produce coffee will hold great power and wealth. Thus, the story now turns to far-flung tropical hillsides, daring voyages, and the seeds of an empire built on coffee beans. The coffee trade is about to explode across the globe, carrying both prosperity and pain in its wake. For 200 years after its discovery, the world's only source of coffee was the Arab lands, especially Yemen. The port of Mocha held a virtual monopoly. Every bean that left the Red Sea did so under Yemeni and Ottoman control. European merchants, hungry to profit from this magical crop, plotted how to break that monopoly. Here begins an age of botanical espionage and adventurous voyages as empires scramble to transplant coffee across the tropics. Picture a hot afternoon in Mocha around 1616. Along the dusty docks, bags of green coffee beans are being loaded onto an English ship. But the beans have been boiled or parched intentionally by local traders, rendering them infertile, a precaution to prevent outsiders from growing their own. The Arabs fiercely guard their coffee plants, forbidding export of viable seeds or seedlings. Enter Peter van den Broeke, a daring Dutch merchant. Determined to obtain a living coffee specimen, he spends weeks befriending local growers and studying their routines. According to Dutch records, Van den Broeke finally manages to smuggle out a handful of young coffee bushes from Mocha, likely in secret, around 1616. The story goes that he concealed them amid other cargo and spirited them on a ship back to Amsterdam. There, in the temperate climate, the fragile Arabian plants were coaxed to grow in the sheltered haven of the Amsterdam Botanical Gardens. This was a quiet triumph, the first known relocation of coffea arabica outside its homeland, a theft of what the Dutch rightly predicted would be green gold. Over the next decades, those precious Dutch greenhouse plants multiplied. By 1658, the Dutch had enough stock to attempt planting coffee in their colony of Ceylon, Sri Lanka. The first plantation failed. Tropical pests and climate weren't kind, so they shifted focus to the island of Java in the East Indies, where conditions proved ideal. There, coffee trees took root vigorously. You can almost see it. On a Javanese hillside around 1700, a Dutch planter in broad hat and boots walks through orderly rows of glossy-leaved coffee shrubs. Local workers, likely under harsh colonial contracts, move between the trees, picking the ripe red cherries into baskets. The sun beats down on the equatorial plantation as the planter breaks open a cherry to inspect the bean inside. Satisfied, he nods. Java's coffee is thriving, rich in flavour. In the distance, ships wait in Batavia's harbour, today's Jakarta, ready to carry this new crop westward. Within a few years, Java coffee becomes the favoured import of Europe, and the word Java becomes synonym for coffee itself. The Dutch have succeeded. By the early 18th century, their colonies, Java, Ceylon, Sumatra and Sulawesi, are major suppliers of coffee to European markets, ending the Arab monopoly. They even create the world's first known coffee blend, Mocha Java, mixing Yemen's beans with their Javanese ones, a blend that endures in name to this day. But the Dutch were not alone in this botanical race. The French were eyeing a way in as well. In 1714, the Dutch, perhaps as a diplomatic gesture, gifted a young coffee plant to King Louis XIV of France. The royal botanists carefully tended this tree in the Jardin Royal des Plantes in Paris. That tree, lush and well guarded, would become the mother of an entire coffee dynasty in the Americas. Enter Gabriel de Clieu, a bold French naval officer stationed in Martinique, a French colony in the Caribbean. Visiting Paris in 1723, de Clieu became obsessed with the idea of bringing coffee to the fertile soils of the West Indies. Through either charm or cunning, he obtained a seedling from the king's treasured coffee tree. Some say he seduced a lady at court to acquire it, others that he simply appealed to scientific spirit. In any case, he set sail for Martinique with this single precious plant, protected under a glass cloche. Now imagine the voyage of Gabriel de Clieu. A small ship cutting across the Atlantic, its crew sweating under the tropical sun. In the captain's quarters, de Clieu tends to the seedling as if it were an infant. The Atlantic crossing is perilous. At one point, pirates chase the ship, and de Clieu fears a stray shot could shatter his glass case. Later, a violent storm tosses the vessel for days. The cabin leaks salt water, and he clutches the plant to his chest to shield it from spray. Then comes a dead calm. The voyage stalls under a merciless sun. Water grows scarce. De Clieu reportedly shares his own water ration with the seedling to keep it alive. His crew grumble that he's mad, choosing a plant's life over ours, one might sneer. But he is unwavering. The journey even sees an act of sabotage. One jealous crewman allegedly tries to steal or destroy the seedling in the night, forcing de Clieu to stand guard constantly. But at last, after weeks of hardship, Martinique's green peaks rise from the blue sea. De Clieu steps ashore, exhausted and gaunt, but triumphant with his little coffee tree intact. Once planted in Martinique's volcanic soil, that lone seedling flourished. Over the next few decades, it multiplied into millions of coffee trees covering the island's slopes. De Clieu writes with pride that by 1770 there were over 18 million coffee trees in Martinique, all descendants of his heroic plant. From Martinique, coffee spread to neighbouring Caribbean islands like Guadeloupe, Saint-Domingue, Haiti and Jamaica. Here, in the New World's sun-soaked colonies, coffee found climates as welcoming as its native Ethiopia. The French brought it also to Guyana in South America. The Spanish took it to their territories, Cuba, Costa Rica, Venezuela. Each transplant was often thanks to an intrepid soul smuggling seeds or seedlings past vigilant rivals. One more cloak-and-dagger tale. By the 1720s, Brazil, today destined to be the largest coffee producer, had no coffee of its own yet. The King of Portugal was determined to get some, eyeing France's thriving crops in French Guiana next door. In 1727, a Brazilian envoy named Francisco de Melo Palheta was sent to resolve a border dispute in Guyana and secretly to acquire coffee seeds. Palheta, a charming gentleman, won the affections of the French governor's wife at Cayenne. On the eve of his departure, the lady presented him with a bouquet of flowers as a farewell. Hidden inside the blossoms were ripe coffee cuttings and seeds. Palheta carried this precious contraband back to Brazil. From those, Brazil established its first coffee farms. A few small plots that would, over the next century, explode into an empire of plantations stretching over vast tracts of land. The governor's wife's romantic gesture thus birthed what is today a billion-dollar coffee industry in Brazil. By the mid-18th century, coffee trees grew on 3 continents. The coffee conquest was global. European powers vied to plant it in any suitable colony. The Dutch in Indonesia, the French in the Caribbean and Indian Ocean islands like Bourbon-Réunion, the British in Ceylon and later India, the Spanish in Central America. Each transplant meant less dependence on Arabia's mocha and more direct profit. Coffee was no longer just the delicate shrub of Yemen. It had become a true commodity crop, a source of wealth and power. The world's appetite for coffee was insatiable and growing with each passing decade of the 18th century, but this triumph carried a darker side. Far from the convivial coffee houses of Europe, the work of growing coffee fell largely on the backs of enslaved Africans and indentured labourers in the colonies. Let's pause at a plantation in Saint-Domingues, Haiti, around 1780, then the world's single largest coffee supplier, providing nearly half of global coffee output. The French planters had turned fertile mountain slopes into a patchwork of coffee fields. In the cruel geometry of colonial economy, these fields were worked by thousands of enslaved people under the whip. It's early morning. A slave gang moves through the rows, their ankles shackled with light chains. They carry baskets and carefully pluck the ripe red cherries from each branch. The overseer watches from horseback, a long whip coiled in his hand, eyes narrowed for any sign of slowed pace. The tropical heat rises with the sun, but there will be no rest until sundown. A young man climbs a coffee tree to reach higher fruit. His fingers are deft but bleeding from days of this work. In a clearing, other labourers rake and spread the harvested cherries to dry in the sun, the bright berries turning brown and wrinkled. The air smells of sweet, fermenting fruit mixed with sweat. After drying, the coffee must be hulled from its parchment skin, often by hand with mortar and pestle, another laborious task assigned to enslaved women and children. They pound the beans rhythmically, hour after hour, as fine chaff dusts their arms and faces. By night, these labourers collapse in their quarters, too exhausted to do more than gulp a thin meal. They might not ever taste the coffee they produce. That luxury is reserved for their masters and distant strangers overseas. For them, coffee is not a savoury drink, but the yoke of their bondage. The cruelty on Saint-Domingues coffee and sugar plantations was among the worst in the Americas, and it did not go unanswered. Whispers of rebellion grew as bitter as the coffee itself. In 1791, the enslaved people of Haiti rose up in a massive revolt, the first successful slave revolution in history. Plantations were burned, owners killed or expelled. The coffee trees themselves became casualties as warfare engulfed the land. By 1804, Haiti won independence and abolished slavery, but its once booming coffee export never fully recovered. Other regions like Brazil would ascend as coffee superpowers on the backs of slavery until that too was abolished in time. The human cost of coffee's spread, the blood and sweat hidden in each cup, is a chapter as important as any invention or cafe anecdote. It's a sobering counterpart to coffee's joyous cultural voyage. As the 18th century ended, the great coffee migrations were largely complete. Coffee grew in Java, in India's highlands, via a saint named Baba Budan, who had smuggled seeds to Mysore in the 1600s, in Ceylon, in Reunion, in Martinique, and Santo Domingo and Brazil. In the early 19th century, new frontiers would open, coffee to Kenya and East Africa, ironically near its original home, introduced there by the British around 1893 to Vietnam via the French in the mid-1800s and beyond. The world's coffee belt was established, forming a band around the equator where the climate suited this precious bean. From seedling to cup, coffee's journey was now truly worldwide. A little shrub from Ethiopian forests had been adopted, cultivated, and spread by human hands to far-flung islands and continents. Each land gave coffee a new character, a mocha bean's chocolatey boldness, a Java's earthy depth, a Caribbean's fruity note, as soil and sun imparted their terroir. The global supply boomed, and with it, global consumption. By the 19th century, coffee went from a rare luxury to a daily staple for many, second only to tea in international trade. Fortunes were made and lost on coffee. Nations rose economically because of it. Brazil or fell Haiti's post-revolution isolation. Coffee was not just a beverage now. It was one of the most sought-after commodities on earth, rivaling cotton, sugar, and even oil in value. As we move into the 19th century, think of all the threads connecting in each cup. The highland farmers tending trees in distant colonies, the ships braving oceans with cargo holds fragrant with beans, the traders haggling in ports, and finally the consumers in a London kitchen, a Paris cafe, an Istanbul coffee house, brewing and savouring the drink. Coffee had forged a global network of human lives and labour. The stage is set for the next era where coffee becomes fuel for the modern age, the Industrial Revolution and beyond. The humble bean will now help power factories, cheer up soldiers at war, and comfort households through hard times. Our story presses on, like a relentless boiling pot, into the 19th and 20th centuries, as coffee pervades every level of human society. The 19th century dawns with coffee as a firmly established global commodity and culture in the bustling cities of Europe and North America. The Industrial Revolution is transforming daily life, and coffee is right there, fueling the change. Picture a chilly morning in Manchester, England, circa 1850. The sun has barely risen, yet the textile mills are already belching steam. A line of mill workers trudges through the factory gates, faces still creased from scant sleep. Inside the brick-walled mill yard, a small handcart is set up, manned by a woman with a large urn and stack of tin cups. She ladles out hot, bracing coffee for a halfpenny a cup. The workers clutch the dented tin mugs in calloused hands, drawing warmth and alertness before the long hours at the clattering looms. The brew is cheap, bitter, often mixed with chicory to stretch it, but it jolts them awake. As they drink, some nibble on a crust of bread. For these labourers, coffee isn't just a drink, it's their meagre breakfast and a tiny luxury in a hard routine. In many industrial cities, employers have learned that giving a short coffee break can boost productivity, the caffeine sharpening weary minds. By mid-century, coffee break becomes an institution, though the formal term comes later, a brief respite when men and women in factories or offices gather around a communal pot for a necessary recharge. Across the Atlantic in New York City, coffee also becomes the drink of the working masses. By 1850, the United States is importing huge quantities of coffee. Every dockside warehouse in Lower Manhattan bursts with sacks from Brazil, Cuba, Java. Stroll into J&H Burns Coffee House on Broadway in 1855. A self-service establishment where for 1 nickel you get a large cup of coffee and all the bread you can eat. It's filled with clerks, porters, and coach drivers grabbing a quick sustenance. Coffee stands dot the streets, selling to errand boys and bankers alike. Unlike liquor, which reformers rail against in the temperance movement, coffee is seen as the sober stimulant of the virtuous. Businessmen pride themselves on being as focused as a cup of coffee rather than muddled with drink. The American Civil War, 1861-65, further cements coffee's place in the American psyche. Union Army soldiers are issued coffee rations, a whopping £36 per year per man, and they come to cherish their coffee even more than their hardtack biscuits or salt pork. Envision a scene from a muddy army camp in Virginia, 1863. Dawn breaks over rows of canvas tents. A company of Union soldiers crouches around small cook fires, each man with a tin coffee pot or makeshift kettle. They've roasted raw beans in iron skillets over the flames and crushed them with rifle butts or rocks. Now the grounds boil with water, producing a crude but life-giving brew. As picket shots crackle in the distance, the men wrap frozen fingers around steaming tin cups. One soldier, eyes half shut, mutters, "Nobody can soldier without coffee." This sentiment rings true. Letters from the front abound with pleas for more coffee. It's not just caffeine, it's a comforting taste of home and a moment of calm amid chaos. Soldiers trade and scavenge for coffee beans. And when supply lines falter, Confederate soldiers lament the lack and turn to roasting acorns or chicory as poor substitutes. For many veterans after the war, the smell of coffee over a campfire will forever be intertwined with camaraderie and survival. Meanwhile, on the home front in the 19th century, coffee becomes a staple of the household table, but not without innovation. In 1818, a Parisian metal smith invents the percolator, a pot that cycles boiling water through coffee grounds, making brewing easier and more consistent. By mid-century, stovetop percolators are common in American kitchens. The characteristic perk-perk sound and bubbling aroma become morning music in many homes. Later, in 1908, just outside our 19th century focus, a German woman named Melitta will invent the paper coffee filter and drip method, revolutionizing home brewing with clarity and simplicity. But even in the 1800s, gadgets like vacuum siphon pots and various drip devices appear as people seek the perfect cup. Consider also the rise of coffee roasting companies in cities. In the 1850s, 1890s, enterprises like Folger in San Francisco and Arbuckle in Pittsburgh begin selling pre-roasted, packaged coffee that households can buy, instead of roasting green beans at home over a fire, which many did earlier. This improves consistency and convenience. Roasters print catchy slogans on their coffee tins and packets, and coffee is one of the first products to be mass advertised with branding. An era of coffee for the everyman is underway. On the global stage, coffee cultivation continues to expand dramatically. By 1852, Brazil surpasses all others to become the world's largest coffee producer and remains so to this day. Brazil's interior is transformed by coffee plantations, especially in São Paulo province, where whole forests are cleared. The Atlantic forest lost vast acreage to plant row upon row of coffee trees. These plantations, worked initially by slaves until Brazil's late abolition in 1888 and afterwards by indentured immigrants, yield colossal harvests. The economy of Brazil becomes synonymous with coffee, called Brazilian gold. By 1900, around 4 out of 5 cups of coffee drunk worldwide are brewed from Brazilian beans. This oversupply even causes issues, boom and bust cycles, with periodic coffee price crashes that lead farmers to burn excess stock or governments to intervene to prop up prices. Coffee truly is king, and kingdoms can be unstable. Elsewhere, East Africa sees coffee reintroduced, ironically, returning to near its birthplace. European colonizers established coffee farms in Kenya and Tanzania in the late 19th century, using seeds ironically from Brazil, completing a full circle back to Africa. In India, coffee cultivation that began in the 17th century with Baba Budan in the south continues modestly, mostly for export. Vietnam receives coffee via French missionaries around 1850s, and though slow to start, it will later become a giant in Robusta coffee production. By the end of the 19th century, coffee is no longer just a drink of the old world or a luxury of the elite. It's the daily fuel of the modern worker worldwide. In every industrial town, in every frontier settlement, in every port city, people expect their coffee with the sunrise. It has become, as one newspaper called it, the favourite drink of the civilized world. Where once breakfast beverages were beer or wine, now coffee has taken that place for many, sharpening focus and productivity in a new machine-paced age. One English commentator notes around 1890, "The factories run on steam, but the workers run on coffee." There is also a shift in how coffee is perceived socially. In earlier centuries, it was lauded for sharpening the mind and fostering sobriety. In the 19th, it further gains a reputation as a household comfort and a necessity. During times of hardship, a simple cup of coffee can make a meager meal seem sufficient. For instance, during the American Civil War blockade, Confederate families stretched what little coffee they had or made do with chicory brews. The return of real coffee was a taste of normalcy after war. In the Great Famine in Ireland, 1840s, some reports tell of coffee being an affordable warm drink when food was scarce. And, in the grinding poverty of the 19th century industrial slums, a cup of coffee at least provided a momentary relief and suppressed hunger pangs. By 1900, the stage is set for coffee's next evolution, mass production, and the era of convenience. The 20th century will bring instant coffee breaks enshrined in labor rights, and global chains that will carry coffee culture to even greater heights and perhaps excesses. But before we rush ahead, imagine closing the 19th century with a montage. A newsboy in 1890 Chicago warming his hands on a mug at a street vendor before dawn deliveries. An office clerk in London circa 1880 pouring a second cup from a glass siphon contraption to get through ledgers. A Brazilian farmer in 1895 gazing over endless rows of coffee trees ready for harvest, knowing the world depends on these beans. And a family in Berlin around 1899 gathered on Sunday afternoon, mother pouring fresh brewed coffee into delicate cups as they share cake and conversation in that cherished ritual, Kaffee und Kuchen. In each vignette, coffee provides a pause, a comfort, a spark. It has truly become woven into the fabric of everyday life, from the grandest events to the simplest of moments. As we drift from the 19th into the 20th century, coffee enters the modern age hand in hand with humanity's progress and perils. The next scenes will carry us through wars, innovations, and the rise of coffee, not just as a commodity, but as a culture all its own, one that will circle back to its artisanal roots, even as it conquers every corner of the globe. The early 20th century tests the resilience of societies, and coffee proves itself a steadfast companion through the trials. As World War I erupts in 1914, millions of soldiers again turn to coffee for courage and comfort on the front lines. Envision a trench on the Western Front, 1916. Knee-deep in mud, a group of Allied soldiers huddle in a dugout as artillery thunders overhead. In a dented tin pot over a stub of candle, water barely comes to a boil. A corporal carefully adds a handful of ground coffee from a ration tin and stirs. By regulation, each British Tommy is issued a portion of coffee or tea. Many mix them with whatever water they can heat. In this moment, the acrid smell of brewing coffee mingles with damp earth and cordite. One soldier, shivering in his greatcoat, wraps his fingers around a warm tin mug passed to him and closes his eyes. For a brief moment he's transported, perhaps imagining himself in a safe kitchen back home rather than this hellscape. The caffeine eases the bone-weary exhaustion of sleepless nights on sentry duty. When the whistle blows and men steel themselves to go over the top, many have the bitter taste of coffee still on their lips, a final token of normalcy and solace. Back on the home front during the Great War, coffee also undergoes changes. Naval blockades and shortages force some countries to get creative. In Germany and parts of Austria-Hungary, real coffee imports dwindle. Enter coffee substitutes, roasted chicory, barley, acorns, even figs. Brewed to resemble coffee for those who can't get the real thing. An average German family in 1917 might start the day with muckerfuck, slang for surrogate coffee, dark but usually disappointing in flavour. People yearn for the return of true coffee, seeing it as a symbol of better times ahead. After the war, the 1920s bring a brief era of prosperity and a blossoming coffee culture anew. In the United States, the speakeasy culture might have been about illicit booze, but the everyday American still loved their cup of joe. Roasters like Maxwell House and Hillsborough's in the 1920s begin selling vacuum-packed tins to preserve flavour, bringing better coffee to supermarket shelves. The slogan, "Good to the last drop," purportedly said by President Teddy Roosevelt about Maxwell House coffee, becomes a byword for quality. In Europe, elegant coffee houses in Vienna, Paris, and Prague thrive again now as hubs for artists, writers, and intellectuals. In a Viennese cafe, you might see Sigmund Freud stirring his coffee while musing on psychoanalysis, or in Paris, the Lost Generation writers, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, nursing black coffee at dawn after a long night's revelry. Coffee fuels creativity as much as industry. Then comes the Great Depression of the 1930s, a hard time the world over, but even in hardship, coffee remains a small daily grace. Picture a Dust Bowl farm family in Oklahoma, 1935. The fields are dry and bare, there's hardly any money for food. Yet the family manages to have a coffee pot on the stove each morning. The mother stretches the ground coffee by adding a pinch of chicory. She boils the brews strong, and the aroma at least masks the emptiness of breakfast. The parents sip the hot liquid slowly, the warmth tricking their stomachs out of hunger for a little while. They call it Hoover coffee, Riley after President Hoover, implying it's mostly hot water. Still, it's better than nothing. In city slums, too, a cup of thin coffee and maybe a day-old roll from a charity line might be a person's one meal. Many found that coffee suppresses appetite a bit and gives the illusion of energy, the poor man's meal indeed, when meals were scarce. In the midst of the Depression, one bright spot in coffee history emerges. Instant coffee becomes widely available. The idea had been experimented with for decades. The first instant coffee was actually patented in 1901. But it was in the late 1930s that Nestlé developed a reliable process to make a quality instant coffee named Nescafé. Initially, it was intended to help Brazilian coffee producers find an outlet for their huge surplus. Instant coffee meant one could have a cup by just adding hot water, no equipment or fresh grounds needed. Early adopters found it novel, if not as delicious as brewed coffee. Little did they know it would soon prove a lifesaver in wartime. When World War II engulfs the globe in the 1940s, coffee once again is part of the soldier's kit. In American K rations, small tins of Nescafé instant coffee or packets of soluble coffee are included. GIs could make a quick cup in their foxhole with a canteen of hot water. Many a US soldier would later recall those crystals dissolving into a surprisingly decent cup, giving them a moment of peace amidst battle. One famous photo shows General Eisenhower himself preparing a cup of instant coffee for a fellow officer in the field. The British, meanwhile, often carried chicory-blended coffee or tea. Both were morale boosters. However, wartime also meant rationing. In 1942, the United States briefly had coffee rationing. Each person was allotted 1 pound of coffee every 5 weeks, roughly a cup a day. Long lines formed when new rations were released, showing just how deeply coffee drinking was embedded in daily habit. In occupied Europe, real coffee virtually disappeared. Families hoarded beans, if they had them, and ersatz coffee using roasted barley, rye or chicory reigned again. For those under occupation or in concentration camps, the absence of coffee was a minor cruelty among greater ones, but still felt by those who had loved it. When Nabuthane ended, coffee often symbolized a return to normalcy. In 1945, as Europe was liberated, shipments of Latin American coffee were among the relief supplies. One account tells of a Dutch woman in 1945 weeping tears of joy when a Canadian soldier gave her a tin of real coffee, the first she'd smelled in years. For the soldiers returning home, many brought with them a new taste for the instant coffee that had been their companion. This would boost instant coffee's popularity in the post-war era. The mid-20th century saw coffee absolutely everywhere. Office workers now had coffee break routines, with the term officially coined and promoted around 1952 by the Pan American Coffee Bureau to encourage consumption. In factories and offices across America and beyond, 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. became standard coffee break times, often with employers providing free coffee as a benevolent gesture and a productivity hack. The culture of gathering around the coffee pot or the vending machine at break time to chat with colleagues was born. At home, the post-war era also changed how people brewed coffee. The Italian moka pot, invented in 1933 by Alfonso Bialetti, allowed a strong espresso-like brew on home stoves and took off especially in Europe. In 1946, the modern espresso machine was popularized in Italy, Achille Gaggia's invention, giving birth to cafe espresso culture that would later spread globally. In the 1950s, automatic drip coffee makers for home use started appearing, and the convenience of plugging in a machine that drips coffee into a carafe took hold in American kitchens by the 1970s. But even as automation loomed, many still made coffee the old-fashioned ways. Percolators or stovetop pots, the scent filling the house each morning. Now, as we stand in the mid-20th century in our story, coffee is truly a universal backdrop to life's highs and lows. In war and peace, in poverty and plenty, in solitude and community, coffee has been there, a steady, steaming presence. The stage is set for coffee to evolve from a mere staple into something more artisanal again, even as big business and globalization further transform it. The late 20th century will see the rise of gourmet coffee, international chains, and a renaissance of appreciation for the bean's origins. But for now, imagine a quiet scene around 1950. A small family gathers in a kitchen on a Sunday. Perhaps they are in Chicago or Rome or São Paulo. It doesn't matter, because in all places the ritual is similar. The meal is finished, and now the head of the household brings out the coffee pot. As the rich aroma blooms, the family members exhale contentedly. The youngest gets to sip a milky, diluted version as a special treat. The elders reminisce about the week. The warmth of the cup in hand, the flavour both stimulating and soothing. It's a moment of simple human connection. Outside, the world may be racing with new technology and lingering scars of conflict, but here, now, coffee brings a pause, a slow, savoured moment of peace. By the late 20th century, coffee is not just a drink, it's a culture, a fashion, even an identity for some. After the utilitarian mid-century, a wave of change begins, known later as the second wave of coffee. This era, roughly the 1970s through 1990s, sees the rise of coffee chains, specialty drinks, and a new emphasis on the cafe experience. Let's stroll into a typical example: Seattle, Washington, 1985. The morning drizzle falls softly as commuters scurry downtown. You slip into a cozy storefront with a twin-tailed mermaid logo, a Starbucks coffee shop, part of a small but growing chain. Inside, mellow jazz music plays. A line of customers waits, not for plain drip coffee, but for an array of novel concoctions: latte, cappuccino, mocha, espresso macchiato. Espresso machines hiss and whir behind the counter as baristas with aprons and friendly smiles craft each drink to order. One steams milk, creating a creamy foam, while another pulls a shot of espresso, its dark stream pouring like silk. The air is thick with the scent of freshly ground beans and steamed milk, a far cry from the plain percolator days. A young woman in line explains to her friend the difference between a latte, more milk, and a cappuccino, more foam. Such vocabulary, once exotic Italian terms, are becoming common language even outside Italy. You order a cappuccino. The barista deftly pours foamy milk into the espresso, topping it with a flourish of foam. In the foam, he etches a simple heart pattern, latte art, a new playful touch. You cradle the warm paper cup in hand. Paper cups with lids are increasingly common, fueling the grab-and-go culture. The first sip is heavenly. The bold espresso cut by sweet, velvety milk, a dusting of cocoa on top. It's indulgent, yet still clearly coffee at its core. This is coffee as an experience, not just a caffeine fix. You settle into a padded chair by the window. Around you, the cafe is filled with a mix of college students reading textbooks, a businesswoman reviewing notes, a couple chatting softly. It's become a third place, not home, not work, but a comfortable public living room fueled by espresso and ambiance. Starbucks and its ilk are at the forefront of popularizing the coffeehouse culture in America and beyond, reminiscent of the old European coffeehouses, but updated for a new era. They emphasize not just the coffee's utility, but its taste, variety, and the environment in which it's consumed. Espresso, which for a century had been largely an Italian specialty, goes global. By the 1990s, it's hard to find a city in the world without an espresso bar or a multinational chain outlet. From London to Tokyo to Sydney, the same menu of lattes and mochas is replicated, giving rise to a truly global coffee culture. This period also introduces words like barista into common parlance. Coffee making becomes recognized as a skill, even an art. Chains provide consistency and convenience, but also spark interest in higher quality beans and brewing. The second wave cares about blending and roast profiles, offering light, medium, dark roasts, flavored coffees, hazelnut, vanilla, and blends named after their origin or style: French roast, Colombian, Sumatra. It's a step above the canned, pre-ground coffee of old. Some lament the commercialization, the fact that a cup now often comes with a fancy name and a hefty price tag, but millions embrace it. As the century nears its close, a third wave of coffee begins brewing among aficionados. Small independent roasters and coffee geeks start treating coffee more like wine, focusing on single origin beans, coffee from one farm or region, not blended, lighter roasts that highlight terroir flavors, and careful brewing methods. In 1999, for example, the Specialty Coffee Association is growing. Coffee tasting competitions, cuppings become serious events, and fair trade coffee emerges to ensure farmers are paid fairly as consumers grow conscious of the ethical side of their beloved drink. But let's not get ahead. Still in the late 20th century, technology further changes the coffee routine at home. In 1972, Mr. Coffee introduced the first popular electric drip coffee maker for home use in America, and by the 1980s it's everywhere, no more stovetop percolators for most. In 1974, Melita Bentz's filter drip method from way back in 1908 is a standard. Those paper filter rings fill grocery aisles and household cabinets. People wake up to automatic timers that have the coffee brewed fresh for them. In offices, vending machines and large percolators keep everyone fueled without leaving the building, though often with less tasty brew. On the other end, the late 20th century sees the emergence of instant coffee culture in some regions. In parts of Asia, instant coffee, often pre-mixed with sugar and creamer in 3-in-1 packets, skyrockets in popularity, making coffee accessible even where brewing equipment is scarce. Japan, interestingly, one of the largest coffee consumers, develops a fondness for canned coffee, sold hot or cold in vending machines on every corner by the 1970s. It's a quick convenience, a far cry from the leisurely Viennese cafe, but reflective of modern life's pace. As the millennium turns, coffee consumption worldwide is at an all-time high. Countries that historically drank tea or other beverages are embracing coffee. For example, China in the 1990s sees its first Starbucks in Beijing, introducing coffee to a tea-drinking culture. And by the 2000s, local cafes are sprouting especially in cosmopolitan areas. South Korea, by the 1990s, develops a vibrant cafe scene. Debangs and modern espresso bars flourish as coffee becomes a status symbol of westernized coolness. Even in traditionally tea-centric India, urban youth in the 1990s start hanging out at Cafe Coffee Day and barista franchises, drinking cappuccinos instead of chai. Amid all this growth, people still cherish coffee's simple pleasures. For some, it's the daily morning ritual at home. The gurgle and drip of the coffee maker. The first whiff of aroma that signals a new day. For others, it's the social connection, meeting a friend for coffee, which might extend for hours of conversation, using the drink as an excuse to gather. For the tired student, it's burning the midnight oil in a 24-hour coffee shop, the cup beside textbooks. For the traveller, it's experiencing coffee differently in each land. Thick, cardamom-spiced Turkish coffee in Istanbul. Frothy, sweet fin ka pe sua ja Vietnamese iced coffee with condensed milk on a humid Hanoi street. Strong stovetop espresso in a tiny porcelain cup at a Roman bar. Let's frame a quick sensory mosaic of these modern coffee moments. In Italy, mid-1990s. A businessman stands at a marble counter, quickly knocking back a single espresso shot prepared by a mustachioed barista. It's over in seconds, a necessary jolt, and he rushes off after a curt grazie. Nearby, two lovers linger over a shared granita di cafe frozen sweet coffee topped with whipped cream, savouring it slowly in the afternoon heat. In Ethiopia, where it all began, a family performs the traditional coffee ceremony in their home. Green coffee beans are pan-roasted over a fire, filling the air with thick, sweet smoke. The host takes the pan around for each guest to inhale the aroma. The beans are then ground with a mortar and pestle and brewed in a clay jabina pot. They pour the coffee gracefully into small cups, add a bit of sugar, incense burns, conversation flows calmly. In modern Addis Ababa, people still do this daily ritual, connecting them to an ancient heritage, even as espresso machines also buzz in city cafes. In a New York cafe, late 1990s, writers with laptops, a new phenomenon, then tap away, fueled by endless, refillable drip coffee. The atmosphere is a mix of creative focus and the hiss of steam from the espresso bar. A chalkboard on the wall lists exotic single-origin brews, Kenyan AA, Guatemalan Antigua, Ethiopian Yirgacheffe. The barista offers to brew a cup via French press, or the new trend, a pour-over filter to bring out unique flavors. Customers actually care about words like acidity, body, and notes of chocolate or citrus in their coffee now, an elevated appreciation compared to just good and strong. At home, on a Sunday morning, anywhere in the world, someone stands by their kitchen counter, still in pajamas, patiently pouring hot water in slow circles over grounds in a cone filter, making a perfect cup just for themselves. The sun peeks in the quiet of morning, the ritual itself, the gentle pour, the bloom of the coffee grounds releasing a puff of fragrant steam, is meditative. They take the first sip from a favorite mug and close their eyes. For that moment, there is nowhere else to be, and nothing else needed. The coffee is warmth and solace in a cup, as it has been for so many across time. Coffee's second life, thus, is vibrant and diverse. It has transcended being simply a stimulant or a commodity. It's a global cultural phenomenon, yet also deeply personal. As the 20th century draws to a close, every generation has its coffee memories, every community its preferred style, every person their own relationship with the brew. And as we step into the 21st, coffee shows no sign of slowing down. New trends, cold brew, latte art throwdowns, third-wave micro-roasters, sustainable sourcing continue to evolve, but the core remains. That curious little bean that energizes our bodies and soothes our souls. Now, we turn to today, the modern moment, to see how the ancient ritual of coffee drinking continues to echo in our contemporary daily life, closing the circle of our long journey. The sun is setting over the green highlands of Ethiopia, casting long, golden rays on rows of coffee trees swaying gently in the breeze. In a small village not far from where that legendary goat-herd Kaldi once roamed, a family prepares for their evening Buna coffee ceremony. Though satellites and smartphones exist in this world now, here the old ways still hold their magic. You are invited as an honoured guest, and you sit on a low stool in a circle with the family, the quiet of dusk settling around you. A grandmother, wrapped in a white cotton shawl with traditional embroidery, tends a fire of charcoal on the ground. Beside her is a tray of green coffee beans, just harvested from the surrounding hills, which are lush with coffee shrubs. She smiles at you and begins the ritual. First, she washes the beans in a small basket, then pours them into a flat pan. As she places the pan on the charcoal brazier, she starts stirring slowly. The beans make a soft, rattling sound. Soon, pale green turns to tan, then brown. She expertly roasts them to the perfect hue, never letting one scorch. An incredible aroma lifts into the air, far more complex than any cafe roast you've known. It's grassy, nutty, with hints of florals. The children sniff and giggle. Even they appreciate this fragrance. The grandmother then rises and walks the pan around the circle, wafting the smoke towards each person so all can bless themselves with the rich smell. You inhale deeply. It's intoxicating. This pure scent of coffee roasting, carrying centuries of history in its smoke. For a moment, you swear the spirit of coffee itself is present in this very smoke curling into the twilight sky. Next, the beans, now dark and oily, are ground by hand in a heavy mortar. The rhythmic thump-thump of the pestle is calming, almost like a heartbeat. Conversation in the circle is gentle and unhurried. Once ground to a fine powder, the coffee is added to a black clay jabina, a round-bellied coffee pot with a long spout. The grandmother pours in water and places the jabina directly in the hot coals. As it heats, she adds a pinch of spices, perhaps cardamom or a touch of clove, a signature of Ethiopian coffee tradition harking back to the earliest days when coffee and spice mingled on Arabian ships. The coffee soon boils and froths, threatening to overflow from the jabina's neck. With perfect timing, she removes it from heat and lets it settle. This sequence repeats, much like in Turkish coffee, bringing it 3 times to a boil, ensuring strength and flavour. Finally, she takes a carved wooden stand and sets the jabina upon it. Careful not to disturb the grounds settled at the bottom, she pours the coffee in a single stream into tiny porcelain cups arranged on a tray. The stream is dark and smooth, filling each cup with a thin layer of foam at the top, proof of a good pour. Before handing out the cups, the family's eldest son lights a stick of incense and places it in a holder by the tray. Fragrant wisps of frankincense swirl around, mixing with the coffee's aroma. In Ethiopian culture, this moment is almost sacred. Coffee isn't rushed. It's an offering of hospitality and respect. At last, you and each family member receive a cup. The coffee is taken black, with perhaps a spoon of raw sugar if desired. You notice the smallest daughter has a cup mostly filled with milk, a concession to youth, as even kids partake in the social ritual, albeit with heavily diluted brew. You raise the cup to your lips. The coffee is strong, full-bodied, and layered with flavours of the land, a hint of berry-like brightness, a winey richness unique to Ethiopian beans. It is the taste of origin, as wild and wonderful as that first legendary brew that kept monks praying through the night. As you sip slowly, the sky outside turns deep purple, one by one bright stars emerging. A hush falls as everyone savours the first cup, abul, known to be the strongest. In this calm, you feel a profound continuity. This could be a scene from 100 years ago or 300, and indeed you feel the presence of those before you, the Sufi monks whispering prayers over their coffee in Yemen, the Ottoman poets spinning tales in the coffeehouses of Istanbul, the European thinkers trading ideas in London and Paris, the weary farmer in Brazil at dawn sipping from a tin cup before heading to the fields. Across epochs and continents, so many human moments have been shared over coffee, and here you are, part of that unbroken chain. The conversation resumes quietly. The family asks if you like it. You smile and praise the flavour sincerely. They beam with pride. Coffee is their heritage and gift to guests. The grandmother deftly refills the jabina with water for the second round toner and reheats it with the same grounds in Ethiopian custom. The second brew is milder and the third milder still. As the night deepens, stories are told. The grandfather speaks of how his father taught him to tend coffee trees, how each tree is almost like a child requiring care. Coffee isn't just a crop here, it's woven into folklore and everyday life. The children listen, learning that this tradition will one day be theirs to carry on. You glance outside at the silhouette of coffee shrubs under the starry sky. It strikes you that you have come full circle. From the ancient origin in these very highlands, through all the travels in time and place, and now back here in the present day. A full cultural and historical arc, as the prompt described, has unfolded like a story within a single cup. As the ceremony concludes, you drain the last sip from your cup. The youngest child yawns. The coffee's effect is mellow here, perhaps because it's shared in such a relaxed manner, not gulped in haste. The grandmother offers a final blessing. May your road be smooth as our coffee, and your life as sweet. In keeping with tradition, you respond with thanks and a wish for prosperity, acknowledging that this gathering, this exchange, is about more than coffee. It's about community and continuity. Later that night, lying under a mosquito net, you remain awake just a little longer, your heart gently stimulated by the evening's caffeine. You reflect on how one humble beverage can connect people across worlds and eras. Tomorrow morning, somewhere else, millions will wake and reach for their coffee machines or queue at cafes, hardly thinking of the history poured into their mugs. But you will think of it. You'll remember the sensory tapestry of this journey, goats dancing on an Ethiopian slope long ago, chants of Sufi mystics at midnight in Yemen, clandestine cups in Mecca's backstreets, lively banter in Istanbul's coffee houses, the clink of porcelain in Vienna, the roar of warfront fires with coffee boiling in tin, the hiss of an espresso machine in a neon-lit city, and the quiet, steady hands of a grandmother roasting coffee in the Ethiopian twilight. All those moments, disparate in time and place, share the common thread of coffee, tiny beans that hold stories of humanity's ingenuity, ritual, and resilience. In the darkness, you hear the soft chirr of insects and, perhaps, faintly, the distant call of a night watchman in the village making rounds. If he's like others through history, maybe he, too, carries a thermos of coffee to keep him vigilant through his watch. The aroma from the ceremony still lingers in your hair and clothes, comforting and familiar. You close your eyes, and as you begin to drift, a final image surfaces. A vision of that 9th century goat-herd Chaldi watching his frisky goats under the African sun. You imagine him taking those first curious steps toward understanding the coffee plant. Did he have any inkling of what he'd set in motion? Likely not. Yet, here we are, a millennium later, with coffee entwined in the rhythms of life around the globe. The story of coffee is ever brewing, an unfinished tale in every cup. Tonight, somewhere a weary nurse on a late shift wraps her hands around a warm mug, finding strength in its heat. Somewhere, a group of old friends reunite in a cafe, laughing over lattes as if no time has passed. Somewhere, a student studies by lamplight, the smell of instant coffee keeping him company. and somewhere a sleepy traveller in an airport takes a sip, feeling both the longing for home and the excitement of new destinations, the coffee a familiar comfort amid change. Your journey through coffee's history comes to a gentle close, not with an end, but with a calming realization. Each day that dawns, as long as humans seek warmth, energy, and connection, coffee's story will continue. It's there in the clink of the spoon in the morning cup, in the offered pot to a guest, in the quiet moment of reflection over a midnight brew. The last thought that floats through your drowsy mind is like a quiet echo, the tale of how people started drinking coffee, and everything that came after is not really about the beverage alone, but about people, our curiosity, our need for togetherness, our resilience through hard times, our simple joys. In the soft depths of night, that echo lingers like the faint aftertaste at the bottom of a cup, unresolved yet comforting, promising that in the morning the story will gently begin anew with the first aroma of coffee on the breeze.